Hey, welcome back to Global Environment. We're on agriculture. We talked about some of the advantages of herding in the past segments and how that may have occurred. Now we're going to get a little bit into plant domestication and agriculture. So let's look at the PowerPoint for a bit. Now, domestication of plants. Where did that first occur? How did that happen? It might surprise you. Often it was in garbage dumps and latrines. And you say, what is that all about? Now think of it. We have early hunters and gatherers. They're going out, they're collecting food, and they're going to go, for example, if they're picking berries, to the bushes with maybe the sweetest, largest berries. They bring those back. Some of it they throw away, and some of it passes right through them. So what you find when it comes to domestication of plants, often that selection and where you basically build it up is in the garbage dumps and latrines, which is kind of interesting. It's not what people would expect. Sometimes it was very unintentional. Okay, so what are some plant traits that we would like when it comes to agriculture? One is the size of whatever we're gathering. We want big fruit, big vegetables. That's important. Also, the abundance. Is it easy to gather? Can we get a lot of it, or is it really hard? The rate of growth is important. For example, we might like acorns, but domesticating oak trees is a really tough thing. You might have to wait a couple hundred years before you have your third or fourth crop. Here's an example when we're looking at size of corn. Right here, you got familiar corn, and right next to it, we have a shot of a probable ancestor of corn. And look at the difference. Look at the difference through the selection process. What we end up with, a lot more energy that goes to people. More plant traits. What's important? One is the taste. Another one is toxicity. If a plant gives you a stomach ache, or one form of it gives you a stomach ache, you might gather another type that is less toxic. Also, the ability to gather the crop is important. If it's hard to gather, people steer away from it. And a lot of times this boils down to ancient hand tools. So the sickle and also with the plow. How easy is it to cultivate these plants? First, agriculture. So we talked about kind of where in a village it might occur, domestication. Where are we talking about early agriculture developing overall when we're thinking of areas on a global scale? One of the places that most people think early agriculture first occurred was in the Fertile Crescent. There's also some new data that says maybe China was a little bit earlier than the Fertile Crescent, but about the same time, similar stories. So here's a shot of the Fertile Crescent, and you can see that a lot of it is in modern Iraq, Syria, Iran, Kuwait, places like that. And it's often attributed to the fact that there were nearby large rivers like the Euphrates and Tigris. Now that's part of it, because actually a lot of the early agriculture in this area was in the highlands, not the lowlands. This played a part in it, but it's not the whole story. All right, and you can see early agriculture in China, the Middle East, some in Africa, Mesoamerica, South America, and also in Southeast Asia. These were the real early areas. And why in places like the Fertile Crescent? Let's talk about that as a case study. One reason for this is that original hunting and gathering food sources were becoming scarce, and there were famines, and certain large animals were disappearing, and this really forced people's hands into becoming agriculturalists. Also, the land was fertile, but not overly fertile. You might think the more fertile the land, the more agriculture. That's not always true. Southern Argentina has even more fertile land, but what that allows is people not to pick up agriculture. And you'd say, well, why would that happen? Think of it. We talked about hunters and gatherers before working 3 days a week. Most farmers work 7 days a week. Most farmers are actually smaller and more sick than hunters and gatherers. Now, let me tell you a little story here to show you how bad a farmer's lot may be. If you look in Holland, 2,000 years ago, you can look at grave sites. The average height of a Dutchman 2,000 years ago, and they were partially hunters and gatherers, they had some herding too, they were about 5'9" on average. And agriculture took off, and in the 1800s, the Dutch army was trying to draft people into their army, and they had certain requirements. And there was a height requirement. And in the 1800s, in a period in the 1800s, 1/4 of Dutchmen did not qualify for the proper height. Do you know what that height was? It was 5'2". Okay. Today, when we have very advanced agriculture, the average Dutchman is close to 6'1". So a farmer's lot is pretty tough. They were kind of forced into agriculture, many groups. It had advantages later, but initially it often was a tough life. Okay, Fertile Crescent also had a very useful climate, Mediterranean climate, so there were more grains present for domestication. It was mountainous, so you have many habitats, much more biodiversity, more candidates, and they had a balanced diet with the plants they were able to produce, and this was important for sustainability. And many animals present to help with, domesticated animals to help with the work. Okay, now just quickly I want to go into the idea of why would groups pick up agriculture and how that would occur. We have this traditional story that the people, after hundreds of thousands of years, suddenly discovered that seeds made new plants and they could do agriculture. That's not the case. Hunters and gatherers know plants come from seeds. But what they do is very slowly build up agricultural practices. And it could be simply clearing around trees that they use, or doing selective burnings, or small-scale agriculture. But what happens? The surplus that builds out of these small-scale changes to agriculture turn into more people, higher population. So you can't go back, and you're forced to do a little bit more agriculture, and a little bit more agriculture. It's a ratchet effect. So keep that in mind. The old stories are probably wrong. It was more of a ratchet effect, and people were actually forced into farming. So we'll stop there, and I'll see you next time, and we'll talk about some of the big impacts of farming on the environment.